If we are up, and here we go, we are recording now. So that is great. Um, so I think we are good to go. Again, welcome back. If this is the first time, welcome. And if you were joined any of the presentations we did last month, welcome back. So today, I'm Paul Winski. I am the horticulture agent, and I'll be speaking about landscape plants for the shade. Next week, Mr. Shannon Dietz will be back. We got a lot of positive feedback, and people wanted more information on backyard poultry. So we will be doing He will be doing part 2 of that. Um, on the 18th, Kim will be back talking about growing 10 outstanding herbs. And on the 25th, we'll be covering youth gardening, getting started, and Brandy Keller will be leading that talk. So with that being said, let's jump into this. So landscape plants for the shade. And this is always a challenge. If you move into a new house, you probably don't have a lot of shade. And if you move into a older house, or you may have a more mature landscape, so you're dealing probably with some shade issues. And so this talk came about from some of the feedback we received from last month from some of the comments you made. So um, as you know, I like to start this off with you folks doing a little bit of work, and it's not going to be a word cloud this time. That was a comment some folks didn't like the word cloud. So if you put it in with a name of a plant. So if you text to 37607 and you text Paul Winski 227. That will give you access, and then punch in the name of the a plant that you've used that performs well in the shade. Just so I can get an idea. Here's one. We've got camellia. Okay, so we'll take a minute or two for you guys to, if you've got your phones, punch that in. And I always like to see what works, what doesn't work. Turk's cap. Okay, that's a good perennial to use. And Turk's cap is quite a sturdy plant, which will do well in the sun or shade. So that's a good one to know. Let's see if we get any other takers and we get any other additions to this list. All right. I think we might be hitting our limit. Let's see if we can get a couple more in there with some ideas. And if not, we will move on because we've got plenty of ideas to give you in order to, here we go. Oh, coleus, very good. Good choice. Good choice. Does well in sun and shade, but those colors really pop in the shade. Mist flower. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Good choice. All right. It's always good to hear and see what other folks. Azaleas and hydrangeas. I'm going to let you guys know right now. I am not going to touch on azaleas or hydrangeas because I think everybody knows that they do quite well in the shade. So we will everybody will assume that they're going to know that. Porterweed, Stachytarfeta, very good. Great perennial to use in the shade. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and lock this, and we are going to move on. Thank you for your input, and I hope this version was a little bit easier for you guys to see and read as to what everybody has been successful with in the shade. Okay, so let's move on. So I'm going to cover annuals, perennials, some grasses, and shrubs. So I'll give you some ideas in all these areas of plants that work well in the shade. So it should give you a good palette and plenty of ideas as you go forward. So here's one that maybe people didn't think about. This is Alternanthera. This is a foliage type plant. So we're not growing this for the flowers. We're growing it for its colored foliage. So here's the one up in the top corner. Party Time has these red pinkish colors along with the green. And this performs very well in the sun and in the shade. I think the colors look much better in the shade on this one. This one, Party Time, will probably get up to about 12 to 18 inches in height. Again, in the shade, it's probably going to be a little bit more compact, a little bit tighter growth. Purple Night is this nice dark foliage, very deep purple, probably about 12 to 14 inches in height, and you can see how that works well in this bed. And then we've got Little Ruby. Now, Little Ruby is also a Texas superstar plant. Little Ruby probably tops out at about 12 inches. In the sun, it might be a little bit taller than that. But the new growth is green, and then as it matures, it gets this purple color, this ruby-like color. So, Alternanthera is one annual that does well. Begonia, again, begonia are both sun and shade, but there's just so many out there now. One of the new Texas, or one of the Texas superstars, is the Whopper, and we're seeing a trend in some of the breeding that the foliage is larger, the plants are larger, the flowers are larger. The one thing I do, I will, caution you on, or one tip is that if you buy the bronze foliage ones, in the shade, that bronze foliage is not going to be as intense as it would be if it was in the sun. So it might be a little bit muddy in its color. But if you get that in full sun, that foliage is going to get very dark. But you've got pinks, reds, whites. So begonia is very versatile, but it does add a nice color pop in the shade. Hypoestus, polka dot plant. Probably not used as much as it should be, but there's been a lot of breeding lately. The Hippo series is one that comes to mind. In fact, these two, the pink and the red down below, they are both in the from the Hippo series. That's proven winners genetics. But you can see very nice color contrast. So in a deeply shaded area, these colors would definitely jump out at you. And add some nice color, some nice depth, and a little bit of texture to the landscape. Impatiens. At one time, Impatiens, they were probably one of the top 3 bedding plants in the industry. Great colors, great habit, flowers over the entire plant. So work extremely well, and they love the shade. But then this happened about 10 years ago, 9 years ago. Impatiens downy mildew reared its ugly head and basically wiped out the impatiens market. And this is what it does to the plant. So there are 2 series that are out in the market now, and I know I've seen Beacon, but there's the Beacon series and the Amara series, and they are impatiens downy mildew resistant. So these are images of their field trials. The ones, and I believe, I know Amara's, this was trials over in England where impatiens downy mildew is very prevalent. These from the Beacon series, I'm not sure where that trial was. So they were either inoculated or they were, it just happened on its own. But you can see how well these plants hold up between those that were infected and those that weren't. So again, Beacon series or Amaras, keep your eye out for them. If you like impatiens and you've had a hard time keeping them alive because of this downy mildew issue, these are 2 series that I would definitely keep an eye on and give them a shot to see how well they will perform for you in the landscape. And last on the annuals is sweet potato vine. You can see sort of a trend that a lot of these foliage plants can bring color, can bring texture, could add depth to the landscape. And sweet potato vine is one that has really come a long way. When we first started out, you had the chartreuse of Marguerite, and then you had the dark foliage of Blackie. Now you look at the different shades, the different colors. So whether if you've got combination planters that you're putting in the shade, or you just want it as a ground cover, as an annual ground cover to give it a pop of color, sweet potato vine will fit in nicely. All right, perennials. So let's touch on a couple perennials that will do well in the shade. Farfugium, leopard plant, used to be Ligularia. and the botanists, for whatever reason, changed the genus on us. But this is the giganteum, so this is the giant leopard plant, and very bold look in the landscape. Glossy foliage, dark green foliage, almost looks like lily pads, and if they were floating on the water. But then you've also got some of these variegated ones where it looks like somebody came through with a paintbrush with yellow paint and just went through and started flicking on it. Um, they do bloom, so this is what the flower spikes would look on it. And this is usually, I believe they're spring bloomers. Leopard plant can give you unique colors, unique textures, and they just love the shade, so they do extremely well there. Ferns, okay, and there's more ferns than you can shake a stick at, but they will definitely thrive. The deeper the shade, even the better. But you can see down here, like with the Japanese holly fern, how it softens the line of those boulders. You've got foxtail, you've got the soft shield polystichum. So, and there's just we could probably do a whole hour talk just on ferns for the Gulf Coast. So there is plenty out there. It really just depends what you're looking for and what look and what texture it is that you want to add to your landscape. Peacock gingers. How many of you are transplants from the Northeast or the Midwest and you used to have hostas? Well, hostas struggle down here. In fact, I would not recommend a hosta. You could try it, and I've seen them in a few places, but in general, the hostas just don't like our humidity. They don't like our soils. So if you want something that's going to give you that look of a hosta, these gingers, the Camphilia genus, work extremely well. This is a variety called Alva. Now, just like a hosta, they will die back during the winter. They'll go dormant. And then as the soil temperatures start to warm, temperatures go up, they will start to put out their foliage. And again, we are growing these for their foliage. You can see they've got some, small flowers that are in there. You can see it's sort of a pinkish violet color for Alva. And then here's gold peacock, jungle gold. And this one it's got nice on the underside. It's got a sort of a reddish pink to it. We've got variegated green and white on the top, and down at the base, this one will flower also, and you'll see a little yellow flower down at the base. So again, if you want that look of a quote unquote hosta for the South, Camphilia is the way to go. I know the Mercer Arboretum used to have a great collection of these. I don't know how it's held up with all the flooding, but it'd probably be about this time of year that they will start emerging. So if you're out at the Mercer, go ahead and see if you can find them, because they used to have a really good collection, and you'd get a really good idea of what these plants could do and how they would perform. Chinese ground orchid, Blatilla. Now, this is going to be an early, late winter, early spring bloomer. So this is one that I love this. We used to grow these in quarts when I was in the industry. It's sort of this fuchsia pink color. There's white varieties. There's even a yellow variety. So it sends up these spikes. Foliage comes up first, and then it sends up these spikes, and it will bloom up from the bottom on up through the top. But again, early spring. So the one thing I always like to stress when you're considering these plants is make sure you have interest in your garden throughout the year. I know the annuals we can always put annuals in, but the perennials and even the shrubs that bloom, you want something to keep your interest, to get you out there on a regular basis, and to turn around and be able to see something new each time you walk the garden. Here's another one, a tropical, but it does perennialize here. This is curcuma. Tulip ginger. So here's Kimono deep rose, blushing star. Some people or most people probably think the white section up here is the flower. Actually, they're bracts, similar to poinsettias, where the red part most people think that is the flower, but it's not. And the flower is actually located right in these sepals and down in through here. So you can see one sitting there, you can see one sitting here. So these are the actual flowers, but everybody notices the bracts, and that's what catches your eye. So some of these are about a foot tall. I've seen several that can be even taller. So gingers do, of course, because of our climate, they perform extremely well here, and they will just continue to bloom throughout the entire summer. One that's great, that works well as a ground cover, is a juga. Very low growing. So you can see in this picture, when it does bloom, it puts up these spikes of like powder blue flowers. They mature when they bloom probably at about 6 to 10 inches tall. I would say more, 6 to 8. It is a spring bloomer. This one you can use in sun or shade, but for the shade, they really do thrive. And you can really have some interesting colors and textures here. So this is actually burgundy scallop. So even when it's not in bloom, you've got something really neat to look at. And this is chocolate chip. So the new growth is dark. And it looks like, chocolate chips, I guess. And then as it matures, it sort of gets this muddied like foliage with a little bit of a maroon pigmentation in it. So does extremely well, and these are very good plants. Once they're established, they'll be drought tolerant and just perform extremely well. All right, just a quick, since we're at a break here, Brandy, you have any questions for me, or are we good?
No questions, Paul. This is
okay.
Kim.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Okay, so we'll move on. Grasses, liriope, or when I moved to Texas, people were calling it liriope. So just depends on where you are from, but liriope gives you that nice texture, really good landscape plant. You can use it as a specimen plant on its own. It will get nice and large. It'll have this arching foliage, and then you'll see these either nice lavender or white flower spikes that will emerge in the spring. Again, it will work well in the sun or shade, which is good. So if you have it in a spot, early on where it's in sun, and then you've got trees that grow up around it, and you're then in heavy shade, you won't have to find another plant. This plant will continue on and work extremely well. There's variegata also. So even when it's not in bloom, you've got some color with that nice green and white foliage. Mondo grass, Ophiopogon. Again, another nice soft textured, maybe a little bit finer in the foliage compared to liriope. It is evergreen. Again, this is another one that can go from sun to shade, but I really like it in the shade. It has a really nice effect. Oh, sorry about that. And then we also there's a dark foliage one called nigra or nigrescens. This is going to be, if you find it and you like it, I would say purchase it if you want to give it a shot. It is a very slow grower, especially with it being in the shade. It performs well. It has a nice color and texture, but it is a very slow grower because of the color of that foliage. And then there's Dianella, and Dianella is a broader shaped leaf to it. It is variegated. We've got green and golds. We have green and whites. There's all green. There are ones that have even like a bluish tinge to them, which perform extremely well. They do flower. They will send up a spike, and it will have a little star-shaped flower along the stem. Blue petals, and I believe the center is an off yellow or a light yellow. But again, this gives you a really interesting look, and it's a way of bringing color into those dark areas in the landscape. Okay, we are going to head into shrubs. Kim or Brandy, any questions, or should I keep moving on?
Keep moving on.
Keep moving on. All right, works for me. All right, so shrubs, aspidistra, cast iron plant. It's interesting that this falls under shrubs, but it's one of those, the way the plant grows, it to me, it reminds me of a perennial, but it is evergreen. Once it's established, it does an extremely nice job filling in spots. One variety, Milky Way, which is over here, it's got these spotting on it. It's got some variegation to it, but there are people that are aspidistra collectors that spend a lot of money on aspidistras, and they come in all shapes and sizes. So there is a lot out there. What we normally see is this typical green. We may see Milky Way, but if you Google aspidistra, there are some specialty nurseries out there. That have some really unique varieties. This is a very popular plant in Japan. So there's a lot of genetics coming out of there, and there are really some unique forms and really cool habits that are out there for aspidistra, but does extremely well. The typical green probably gets up to about knee high. So it's a great plant that fills in various spaces.
Are these
Nandina.
native, Paul? Sorry, excuse me.
No, I would say they are not. They're probably native, since a lot of them come out of Japan. I would tend to think they probably originated there. Okay, Nandina. We're used to seeing Nandina around, used a lot in foundation plantings. It does bloom. The one thing I do want to say is there's a lot of new genetics out there on this. I mean, Gulfstream was really set the bar. That is now off patent. There's varieties like Firepower, Sunray, Tuscan Flame that the new growth just really lights up. So even in the shade, whether it's a deep purple or a bright yellow that goes orange, there's some really good foliage out there. The new growth looks great. And then the overall habit of these, very compact, very tight, very neat and clean plants that you can use in the shade. Mahonia, this is one of my favorites. I used to do new product development, and this blooms early. So like right after Christmas and sometime in January, where the Christmas rush is settling down, and this starts to bloom, and it puts out these spikes with these yellow flowers, and you cannot miss it when you see it. And then once these flowers have been pollinated, you see these clusters of blueberries almost. They look like blueberries. Common name, I think, on the Mahonia is a lot of people refer to it as it was called Oregon grape holly, because you stick your hand in there, you're going to feel it. It's going to scratch you up a bit. But these are just great. I think they're underutilized. There's a lot of different varieties out there. There's a lot of different species of Mahonia. But for the shade, it's a really good plant. And again, it's something that will get you out into the garden in January and February when, maybe you're getting a little stir crazy. Well, I guess we're all getting a little stir crazy being indoors now, but this plant at that time of year, that yellow color just screams at you. You can't miss it. But then again, here's another one. So here's Mahonia eurobracteata, and this is soft caress, and this is part of the Southern Living series, and it's almost got a fern-like look to it, or a bamboo-like look to it. This one you can rub your hand through it, very soft, very delicate. It still gets the flower spikes, maybe not as prominent as what we saw with Charity, but they still put those blooms out, and they do extremely well. So this is one, and this probably tops out at only about 3 feet. This one's a little bit more compact, and just gives a great look in the landscape. It's again, another neat and tidy plant that you can use. All right. Acubas. Acubas are really kind of cool plants. You can find them. Again, this is another one. There's a lot of breeding and a lot of genetics that comes out of Japan. This is the typical green foliage, probably tops out. Some of them can get up to 6 feet tall, 7 feet tall. The females will set a nice bright red fruit. Some varieties I've seen that the fruit is higher up in the plant. Other varieties, the fruit is lower down in the plant. So it really, just depends on what either species or variety it is. And this fruit is usually evident right around Christmas time. So again, something else to go out and look at in the landscape when this is there. This is gold dust. So again, um, the foliage is what's going to grab you, and so you can see that yellow and green variegation, very very prominent. So you can just picture that in a shaded area, that color is just going to really draw you in, and give you something to work with. Really, also with complementary plants around it. Camellias, if you're in the South, camellias are great. So the sasanquas, the other thing that's great is you can extend the blooming of camellias because we've got two species that work extremely well down here. So we've got the sasanquas, which are our fall and winter bloomers. This picture right here, this is Yuletide. This is one of my favorites. Again, right around Christmas time in December, this one starts to bloom, and just those yellow stamens against that bright red single flower. Nothing real fancy, but that contrast just really jumps out at you. So the sasanquas are your fall winter bloomers, and then we've got our japonicas, which are our spring bloomers. So about the time sasanquas are going out, japonicas can come in. So you can see, again, we want that progression of flowers throughout the entire season, throughout the entire year, which is great for us down here in the Gulf Coast because we're able to do things like that. And the japonicas, you've got singles, you've got doubles. This is a peony type. You have anemone type. You've got single colors, bicolors, you name it. The camellias really run the whole gamut. There's a couple nurseries over in North Carolina that are mail order, and they focus on camellias. So, if you're looking for a specific color or a specific flower type, they would have it, and they do extremely well. So, great plant for the shade. This one, I don't know if everybody is aware of this one, but osmanthus is a great, great plant. It doesn't look like much in this image here, but when it is in bloom, these clusters of these little white flowers are so fragrant that you just can't pass it by. They do extremely well down here. I used to love these. Would be in bloom, and the fragrance would be wafting through the air on the nursery about the same time as that Mahonia charity was in bloom. So after the first of the year, January, February, these guys, they start putting on their show, and the flowers really pretty insignificant, but the fragrance just really, and it's not a real uh, super sweet. It's not, it's one that it's once you smell it, you'll love it. So this is one, you're going to use it back in the bed a little bit further, tuck it away. It stays evergreen. Foliage is nice, very healthy plant. But when it blooms, you are going to know it's in bloom, and it's worth waiting for. So with that, do we have any additional questions? Let me click on over here to see if I see anything. Brandy, okay, let's
Yes,
see.
there are several questions.
Okay, go for it, Kim.
All right, let me scroll back up. Trying to take these in order. Okay, it says, any suggestions for plants that do well in hanging baskets and shade? We have a very shady walkway.
Okay, great question. So some of those annuals that I had listed will do well in hanging baskets. You can always go with some of the ferns. in hanging baskets, and they'll hold up for you, you know, throughout the year. And what I've seen people do is you do the ferns, and then they'll do them in bigger baskets, and then they'll pop in some annuals just to give it a little bit color for that time of year. So in the cool season, they'll pop in maybe some pansies or violas, something like that, and then maybe in the warmer seasons, they'll pop in. They'll put some impatiens in or something like that. So I think some of the plants that we had listed there on the annuals will do well, but then the ferns will do well also. So hopefully that helps you out. Next one.
Okay, next question from Carla. Does the tulip ginger produce an edible tuber/root?
Good question, and I honestly don't know. It's been interesting. I've been doing a couple talks, and people are looking more about, you know, which flowers are edible and things like that. I honestly don't know if that curcuma, if that root on that ginger is edible or not. So I am not going to commit one way or another. I'm sure, you know, if you put that genus in and Googled it to see if that the root from curcuma altissimifolia is edible, I'm sure you'll be able to find an answer to that, but I do not know.
Okay, Paul, this is from Linda. Are Nardenia berries poisonous to birds?
Nandina berry, not that I'm aware of. I don't think so, because I've seen them. I've seen some older plants go ahead and bloom, set seed. I've seen birds eat them, and I have not seen, you know, I guess it might be like anything else. It might depend on the quantity, but I do not think that the Nandina berries are, or the fruits are poisonous. I know in certain states they are becoming somewhat invasive. So I would say if they are starting to become invasive, the birds must be eating them and dropping them in spots, and you know, causing the issues that way. So I do not believe they are poisonous.
Okay, this is from Kristen. What are the soil requirements for Mahonia?
Mahonia, I would think there's nothing out of the ordinary. It doesn't require acidic. I think just good bed preparation that you would use for any of the other shrubs. You know, when you're putting in your planting, you know, good compost work it in, and just try to amend that soil as best as possible.
Okay, we have a couple more, Paul. This is from Lindsay. Does the fragrant olive bear fruit?
You know, it's kind of funny because that plant the blooms are insignificant. I would tend to think it's got to set some sort of type of seed, but I honestly don't know, because usually once it's done blooming, you sort of forget about the plant because it's tucked in, you know, back further in the bed or in that foundation planting that I have not noticed if it does set a berry or not.
Okay, next question is from Christine. Anything you can recommend that is dog friendly?
This is another one. With regard to these shade plants, I would say pretty much all of them are. There's nothing that jumps out at me that would be considered, you know, on the poisonous side. So, and I believe I'm trying to think of the website. There is a website, even if you just Googled poisonous plants or poisonous landscape plants, I'm pretty sure there is a site, because I know I've used it in the past. It just the name of that site escapes me, but you can always go through that site and see which plants, you know, that we've got on this list, if any of them show up, and cross-reference them.
Okay, Paul. So this is from Joanne. Is fragrant olive the same as sweet olive with the bergamot fragrance? Earl Grey tea fragrance?
Good question. That I do not know. This all I know the osmanthus, that variety, the one that I talked about, it's a very sweet fragrance. And when it's wafting through the air, you know it and you never forget it. I'm not familiar with the other one, so I don't know.
Okie dokie. So this one is from Kimberly. Is the heavenly bamboo a spreading plant?
So you're right. It's that name could be deceptive. So it's not a bamboo. It's not a Phylostachys, which is the rambling type that comes up everywhere. It's just that's why I like to call it. I always go by the genus Nandina. So it is not like the bamboo. If that's what you're thinking of, it does not grow that way.
Okay, let me see. I think we have two more, and that's it.
Sure.
It says this is from Mel. Are any of the camellias alkaline tolerant?
Good question. Not that I guess it depends on how alkaline that soil is. But no, camellias are not. They're going to want it a little south of 7. If we're talking, 8 plus, you're going to have to do some, amending of that soil in order to get that camellia to make it happy. So.
Okay, and last question. What are your thoughts about, I think it's Abelia? Abelia?
Abelia,
Abelia?
again, another one that does extremely well down here. There's been a lot of new genetics out there. I've always had more success. Will it grow well in the shade? Sure. It blooms in the spring, and there's a lot of new varieties out there that have really cool variegated foliage. So even if they're not in bloom, you'll have something to look at. So I think they will do well in the shade. They may not bloom as much as in the shade as they would maybe in the full sun, but it's a plant that I think would hold its own and do quite well in the shade.
All right, let's see. Da, 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 da. Sago or toxic, but what do you think of it in shade?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's similar, almost like it's sort of got that fern type look to it. So exactly, you could use a sago in the shade and it would be fine.
All right, let's see. They're coming in, Paul. Do you know the name of the mail order for camellia?
Uh, Actually, it's got camellia in the name, and it's not Camellia Run, Camellia Forest, Camellia Forest Nursery. Man, that's going back a ways, remembering that. So yeah, Camellia Forest Nursery is the name of that, and it's either North Carolina or South Carolina, but they are in the Carolinas.
Okay, Josephina says, can you share the name of the camellia nurseries?
Okay, that's the one we just gave that Camellia Forest Nursery is the one.
All right, which Huchitera varieties do best?
Heuchera.
Varieties do best.
Yeah, Heucheras. I have not been. Gosh, when I was doing new product development, there was a Heuchera Americana that performed well in our heat and our humidity and didn't melt on me. But some of the new ones that are out, it's always deceiving. There's a very good, very well-known Heuchera breeder up in the Pacific Northwest. But if you look at their catalog, everything is hardy from zone. Now this is going back many years. Maybe they've cleaned it up, but they used to have, their plants were hardy from zone 4 to zone 10, even for their heucheras. And they had some incredible colors. I'm not a I love them, but I'm not a big fan of them down here because I think people get enthralled with the wow factor of them, but the plants don't perform well under our conditions. So I normally don't recommend them. Now there's some hybrids out there, which are Heucherellas, which are hybrids of Heuchera and Tiarella. Um, and I've heard some of them might have a little bit more staying power in our heat and humidity and wet conditions. So I would say my recommendation is I personally stay away from them, even though I really love the way they look. But again, there's always those microclimates. There's always people that can get them to grow for them. And if you find that spot and you find that plant that works well for you, give it a shot. This is one of the great things about gardening. You can always, the plants don't always read the recommendations or the what's written up about them on the label or in the catalog. And some of these plants will do very well as long as they're in the right spot. And so I would say give it a shot if there's one that you really like, and see if you can make it work.
Okay. Next question from Kat. Do you recommend our Native American beautyberry bush for
Yes,
birds?
absolutely. It's a great understory plant. So yes, it performs well. When you see it in nature, it's always an understory, so it will do well. The flowers are there; they're pretty insignificant, but the wow factor is in the fall, which is great because it's another time of year that will draw you out in the garden. So by all means, go for it. Yes.
Okay. Do you recommend that for birds, Paul?
Um, yeah, I think yeah, because they must come in and feed on them, because when you see them in early fall, they're covered, and then next thing you know, all the seeds, all the pods are gone. So I'm assuming those birds are coming through and feeding on them. So it's a good bird source. And Brandy might have a better idea, since she's our bird person, if she wants to jump in and have any comment on it. But I think yeah, they work extremely well.
You said it, but yeah, the birds love it.
Okay.
Okay. So what about Persian shields?
Yes, they will do well in the shade also. They will get what they can get pretty tall in the landscape, but yeah, that purple silver color, it's a good color, a good texture. So yes, absolutely go for it.
Okay, Paul, what's the exact name of the camellia on your slideshow?
The one that I is called Yuletide. That was the Sasanqua, the red with the yellow stamens, and I do not know the name of the other one that sort of had that peony look, which was the Japonica. I don't know the name of that. I forgot the name of that variety.
All right, that looks like it's it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. Next week on our homegrown lecture series, again, we will have the Backyard Poultry Part 2 with Mr. Shannon Dietz. Thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Kim.